thinking about communication and mealtimes and swallowing. So if people had questions, I thought we could start there. If people didn't have specific questions, then there's kind of lots of different things that we could talk about depending on what you guys would think is the most helpful. So we could talk about different strategies that you could use to support children's communication skills. We could talk about when to be concerned, when you might want to mention that they need to go and check in with their GP or a speechy or maternal and child health nurse. We could talk about meal times and how to support kids at meal times.
I'd like to talk strategies.
Yeah. Did anyone have any specific, I guess, scenarios, questions that might link to what strategies might do?
So if a child, we have a non-verbal child, 3, that will be transitioning to our kindergarten next year. And she's very settled, but standing at a doorway. Sometimes you can walk up and put your hand out and she will grab your hand and then slowly walk away from the door. Other times you know that you just can't even open that door because it will upset her. But to approach, how should we talk as we're coming over to her or say their name? You know, it really.
And are they linked in with speech pathologists?
Yes.
OT at the moment? And have they given you guys any specific strategies?
Not really.
No.
I find they're not very helpful.
Because I suppose, sometimes I guess there's very specific strategies that like maybe their own therapist has recommended. In general, sometimes children can get really involved in what they're doing and they might block out lots of background information. And so in that case, I would usually be talking as I'm going up to them, so that instead of sometimes if you just appear in their space, then they can be like, all of a sudden somebody's here, and then they might, be scared, and so then they might hit you or bite you or scream, or become upset or distressed because they have missed all of those warnings because maybe there's something they're really interested in and they hyper focus on. So I always kind of say, talking out loud as you're walking up. Then when you get close, I guess getting to their level, still talking out loud, I'm going to open the door now, or whatever it is, I guess, that you're going to do. But I suppose you guys would be pretty good at, like you said, that you can tell sometimes you know that they're in the right space, that you can, kind of open the door, tell them what you're going to be doing, or reach out your hands, and other times they're really, really focused. So for some children as well who have particular interests or little rituals or routines that they do, if you try and interrupt them and move them away from it, it can actually, I guess, they get really quite heightened and they want to continue doing what they're doing. So a lot of the time it's a lot easier when you understand what their little ritual is to kind of wait for them to work through it, give them the space and the time to work through it, and then they're a lot easier to transition. So it just, I guess, really depends what she's doing when she's at the door and what she's getting out of it, which you might not.
She loves the door anyway, but a lot of it is when a parent started arriving, she thinks, where's mine? That she'll be here soon. And like in the morning, other children getting dropped off, it's just parents coming in. And because some parents have picked her up and given her a cuddle. We've got our regulars that have gotten to know her, and but she's not after that, like she's looking for hers.
For her parents.
And I think in a sense of that too, sometimes she's a runner, so sometimes she just wants that door to be open, and the frustration comes when she's not able to go outside. So once that door's open, if somebody gets in front of her and comes in and closes it behind them, then she's kind of like, shut the door.
Yes, you didn't let me out.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get out because I know that everyone's disappearing out there and the parents are out there. And so if I get out there, I might find the parent. And so I wonder, is there another door that she might like to stand at? If it's standing at the doors, would you like standing at the back door? Could you redirect if you know the parents start coming at 3 o'clock? Is there an
I have tried that, and I've tried bringing her over to we've got a little window and there were some birds. It's really quite a boring area, but there were birds in the driveway, and she was there. Because she rests her head on glass. So she comes over here to the fish tank sometimes, and I think that's a bit of a sensory thing as well for her. Because she rests her head there, but it's sort of. Once that door gets open, she hears that that track and she knows. And using things like visual schedules and supports or a social story. I don't know, maybe her parents come at 4 o'clock every day, so you might be able to use a visual timer and have a really set routine so that she starts to learn when her parents are coming. So sometimes it might be that she has
a favourite puzzle, she likes to come and look at the fish tank, so you can kind of create your own routine so that she knows after I do my puzzle and after I look at the fish tank and our time is counted down, then my parents are here.
Yeah.
It's tricky if they don't always come at the same time. That's, if you can't get a specific time from them, that can be a bit tricky, but sometimes I guess creating those own mini routines so that she starts to learn this is what the end of my day looks like. But it's probably, finding individual strategies that work for her.
I suppose if we come up with some kind of routine and then just check in with mum and dad in the morning of like who's picking up and what time that day, then you can kind of go from there and
Yes.
space it out.
Let them know that we need a specific time.
And even if it's not the same every day, but you know,
Yeah.
like sometimes if dad comes in and he says, I'm going to be here at 3:30 this afternoon, well
because
then
she's
great,
not
you can
going
fit
to
it all
know
in.
3 versus 5, but she's
Yeah.
going to know if we do the same routine
Yeah.
before pick up, and you guys will know, look, it takes us 10 minutes. So we're going to engage in the same activity for that 10 minutes before pick up, and then that becomes that routine for
Like
her.
she likes things with buttons as well, so that could be like to push the buttons and that. So could we incorporate that into
Yeah,
a strategy as well?
I would say,
Part of the routine. or
Yeah,
something?
where you can like follow her interests and the things that she likes, you're gonna have a lot more success than if you try, an activity that maybe all the other kids like, but she likes pushing buttons. So do you have some remotes or toys that have buttons that might engage her? She might need someone to sit down one-to-one with her at that time of day if you're trying to keep her away from the floor. But it sounds like as soon as she gets to the door, it's really hard to redirect her until her parents get there. But yes, it can be a bit tricky, I suppose. Every therapist works a little bit differently. So some therapists are maybe more traditional, where they mostly see children in a clinic, and their parents come to them and they give them strategies, and then they go and do things. Other people, I guess, work in other ways, where they might kind of come in and work with you guys and do observations and give you strategies on the spot. And then some people might be somewhere in between. Or sometimes they maybe just contact you by email or phone. So I guess if there are specific, scenarios that you're wanting strategies for, either reaching out if you've got their details, like to reach out to the speech and the OT directly, or going through the parents to kind of say, this is a tricky part of the day, like can we get some help from them? Because I always suppose if I don't hear from centres and preschools, I just assume everything's good. If I've kind of been there, given the details and checked in, and I don't hear from them, everything must be great. And then sometimes I don't hear until they're at breaking point and they go, we have to reduce their hours, we have to end, their spot, like we just don't really know what to do. But yeah, if you've got their contact details, you should be able to reach out and kind of say, this is a part of the day that we're having trouble with, can you give us some strategies to help? And then sometimes monitoring those strategies I find really helpful. So sometimes I'll make up a checklist for centres to fill out, so we can kind of go, we tried, creating a routine, we tried using a visual schedule, we tried using a social story, did they work, did they not work? Because often we kind of give a variety of strategies, but we don't know what's going to work for each individual child. But if you guys trial it and then can kind of say, yep, the visual timer worked, but the visual schedule didn't, or creating a set routine worked, but redirecting didn't, then we can kind of hone in, I guess, on that individual child's strengths and strategies that will work best for them.
Look, I struggle with we've got those cards which have, like the suggestions for the child on them. Getting the children to look at them. If they're busy and I'm trying to get their attention, getting them to actually pay attention to what's on the card. Like I feel like the eyes are going everywhere else because they're wanting to go somewhere else at the time, which is usually whilst I'm trying to prompt them
like
to come
using
in.
like visual schedules or
Yeah.
displays.
Yeah.
And it can be really tricky because some children, I guess, most of the time when we think about when someone is like concentrating or attending, we think that they're looking at us, like their whole body is listening, they're looking, they're facing towards us. But for some children, they are looking around, they're really busy fidgeting, so it might not look like they're listening and paying attention. And I guess you can't really force them to look at something.
Hold this in front
so
of your
I
face.
would just usually encourage that people consistently use
Just
them.
consistency.
And so
I thought that, but just thought you might have some.
So it can be really tricky. They're more likely, I guess, if you're trying to use them in activities that they're really interested, engaged in, getting down to their level, sitting side by side or face to face. I suppose for some children, like it can be uncomfortable, like sitting face to face. If you think about if you're sitting across the table from someone having interviews versus if someone's sitting side by side. So sometimes sitting side by side and having it on the table and pointing to it while you're talking about it can be really useful. And again, when we think about their exposure to any type of AAC, whether that's keyword sign, visual schedules, routine strips, any type of, I guess, visual support, if you think about how much exposure a child has to spoken language from birth up until the time they start talking, you know, you're thinking like, you know, 12 to 18 months before you start to get some single words, and then maybe listen to spoken language, you know, 8 to 10 hours a day, all day. So then when you think about AAC, it's kind of, they need that same amount of repetition. So if you're only using, you know, if you guys are the only ones using the pictures here and they're only here 3 days a week and you only get to use it, you know, for 30 minutes across the day, like think about how many days and years that's going to take for them to get used to it. Some kids do pick it up really quickly when they see maybe that it works really well and they're starting to get their message across, but for any type of AAC, it's one of those things where we go, I always compare it back to spoken language and the amount of exposure a child has before they use it, and it's the same for lots of ones.
I feel like that's not even something you think about, is it?
No,
it's not. So we're kind of setting them up now for primary school years if they still require them later.
So it's one of those things.
We might never see the benefits on some children.
When I think about AAC, is that I like to start it as early as possible so that they're getting lots of exposure, because if you leave it till really late, you go, they've had 6 years of no access to something and now all of a sudden they've got a device. So we're going to expect at least 6 years of the same amount. So if you only use that device 1 hour a day, like however many 1 hour days that takes to get to 6 years. So it can take a really long time.
That's crazy.
It is crazy.
Hang on, someone else has a question.
You go, Kim.
So a child who is non-verbal at the moment and they are hurting other children, like we sort of try and redirect them before that happens, but if not, you know, we do try the soft hands and that, but often they're pulling away and they don't want to have a bar of that. They don't want to be stopped and shown anything. Like, have you got any suggestions there?
So often for children who aren't able to communicate verbally, and I guess in general, when we think about communication, we use the most efficient method that we have. So for all of us, speech is usually the quickest and the most efficient thing that we can do. So we're going to talk. So for children who aren't able to talk yet, or maybe they don't have enough words, often there's a particular behaviour that is the most efficient way to communicate, whether that be hitting, kicking, biting. And so for them, they go, well, if I kick someone, then usually the result is the other kid runs off and I get the object that I want. Or maybe I kick someone and I don't know how to say, help, come over here, Kim. So then Kim always comes running. So I guess we have to look at the full cycle of the behaviour of what happens, you know, what is the situation, what is the trigger, what does the child do, and then what is the response at the end, because that's often what kind of creates that cycle. And if we're thinking about for those children who don't have those verbal communication skills to get their message across, even though like our initial instinct is kind of be like, stop, don't hit, you know, gentle hands, what probably is more helpful is to model what you think they're trying to communicate and model that phrase in the moment. So if you can see that they're trying to go for someone and they're trying to grab something, trying to model while still keeping everybody safe is like, I want that, my turn, give it to me, so that if they do start to copy words, they've got some functional words to use in that moment. Because if, say, for example, they started copying and they said like soft hands or no, don't hit, like that isn't really functional. Well, the other kids are going to be like, what, I didn't hit you, or my hands are soft.
That makes sense.
If they start to copy what you're saying, then that's going to be functional and they're hopefully going to have their needs met a little bit better. But it can be that really tricky, because obviously
sometimes it's just so hard to tell what they did want, or you know, if it was just a frustration, they lashed out at the nearest person.
But I suppose getting right into it in the middle of the scenario happening too is helping them with what to do when they're in that scenario next time, rather than talking to them about it afterwards. There's no point, they're kind of like, well, what are you talking about? What about that?
I got the book that I wanted to get. So.
And I feel like we're so likely to be like, use your words, but we're not specifying what words. It's so funny how you put something and I'm like,
Yeah.
Why don't we say
Yeah.
that? We're telling them to use their words. We just assume they've got those words when they won't, when they might not.
Yeah.
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 Even in here, I still have to be like, go and ask, can I please have a turn? Or when you're finished, can I have a turn? Like, just to remind them how to say it, because that is their go-to.
Yeah.
Just to snatch it or be like, ah, you know how they just.
Yeah.
Noises are easier sometimes.
Yes, they are. And they usually are pretty effective because
Yeah.
the other person's like, whoa, or an adult intervenes and they resolve that
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
But modelling the words, and I guess modelling without pressure for them to copy. So instead of being like, you know, say, can I have that please, or say please, or, you know, say give that to me, just modelling, oh, you know, you want to have a turn, give it to me, because modelling without pressure, that naturally, I guess, shows them what to say. And when we start to say to children, say this, say this, say this, it actually takes away from what we're trying to get them to say, and it's a bit confusing because then they're a bit like, do I only say it when someone's telling me to say it? Do I need to say please, Amy, instead of just you guys, you know, doing it and, you know, saying please, Amy, instead of adding that say to the front. So I would usually just model it. And if they copy it, that's great, but some kids aren't going to have the language skills to copy it. Some kids are probably already going to be a bit dysregulated because, you know, they've already been fighting over it and they just want what they have. So modelling it without that pressure to actually copy what you've said.
Speaking of which, like if a child comes up to you and is trying to tell you something,
Yeah.
and they've got a little bit of a lisp or like not really pronouncing it,
Yeah.
how would you correct them, or like should you even correct them? Like how can you? What should your next thing be? Because
Yeah.
I had a
just repeat the word back to them correctly.
well, yeah, because a parent said to me like that the lisp is cute, so we repeat sometimes what they say,
Yeah.
and like
With the list.
yeah, I'm
With
talking
the
about
list.
Parks. Yeah, so he'll be like, oh, like he'll say something really cute, but with his lisp, and we tend to repeat it the way he says it because it's cute.
Yeah.
But how can we encourage him to like get that correct pronunciation? Like, you know,
And it's
should
really-
we just repeat the word they're trying to say, or
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's really tricky because lots of parents get into that habit when kids say words incorrectly, they
Mhm.
think it's cute, and then they copy it, and then sometimes they don't naturally grow out of it.
Mhm.
A lisp is really, really tricky because you actually are unlikely to naturally grow out of it and be, like, I guess, direct speech intervention. So for you guys, I would just encourage you to repeat back what they say for any kind of speech sound error or grammatical error. Repeat it back correctly. Again, there's no pressure for them to copy it back correctly. There's no pressure for them.
They're just hearing it.
They're just hearing it.
Do they hear the list themselves usually, like if they've got one? Like, is that something they notice within themselves, or not really at all?
Not
I
really.
don't think
so-
they do. Yeah, I feel like some kids don't
So you
realise.
kind of have to teach that. That's like the first step when we're doing speech therapy. First, we need to know, can they actually hear all of their speech sounds correctly?
Yeah.
So for any children who do present with really unclear speech, maybe they do have language delays, I guess, in the baby's room, kids who aren't responding to noises and sounds. Like, parents don't need a referral to go and get a hearing test. So if you have concerns about a child's hearing, either sending them back to their GP or the maternal and child health nurse, or you can kind of say, oh, have they had their hearing tested? And if they say no, not since birth, you can kind of be like, probably a good place to get started. Because often when people come to see us, that's one of the first questions that we ask. So if they haven't been to see someone, it can kind of delay that process. Particularly some parents who, you know, it takes them a while. Like, I had one kid who had really unclear speech, and it took me 6 months to get their parents to go and get his hearing tested. And then they found beads that he'd stuck in his ear, but they didn't know how long for. So I'm like, as soon as the beads came out, like, his speech should just improve.
Yeah.
So,
Things like that.
yeah.
No, tell them. Oh, that's so
So, yeah, definitely.
I'm gonna check all the kids' ears.
Definitely.
We had one up the nose the other day, and it was traumatic.
Definitely worth getting their hearing tested. And yeah, they don't need a referral to go and get their hearing tested. They can just book that.
Yeah.
I've even heard of adults getting like a Lego brick out of their ear like years later and just grown up with it and stuff.
Just be sick.
So what if you? So definitely correct them and say the word correctly.
So I would just say, if they say something and they say the sound incorrectly, I would just repeat back exactly what they've said correctly and move on. So I wouldn't pull them up on it and point
but
it
just
out. Just
Yeah.
repeat it back correctly so that they're hearing that correct model. But for some of the speech sound errors, like that won't be enough, and they actually are going to have to go
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
see someone. So I guess that's probably the other thing. I don't know yet how often you guys would bring that up with parents to kind of be like, oh, the child, you know, has delays or differences or isn't communicating or any, I guess, area of development. Is that something, I guess, that you guys feel comfortable bringing up?
After a
bring
period
up?
of time, like
Yeah, I find it challenging to approach that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be, really, really tricky, particularly if the parents, I guess, don't have an awareness, or maybe it's their first child, or for some families, if their first child maybe has delays, then they then think that that's what all children are like, and don't realise. And I suppose some parents as well wait for other people who spend time with their kids to point it out, so they might not be worried until you guys are worried, or the nurse is worried, or someone else is worried. So it can be really, really tricky, but I guess we know that early intervention is really, really helpful. And it's not speech pathologists, I guess, that are those, I guess, first line responders. It's really parents, you guys, they drop off with seeing their maternal and child health nurse as they get a bit older. So unless they're getting picked up really, really young, and I guess not all families stick with seeing their nurse, and not everyone goes to see the same GP. So yeah, I guess if you do have concerns that someone does have delays or differences, finding a way to talk to them about that sooner than later is helpful, particularly at the moment thinking about wait lists and access to services. A lot of providers, unless you have an NDIS plan, they won't see you. So for some families, you know, they've got to try and get into someone. Community health has long wait lists, so it can take a really long time for them to actually be seen by speech OT. Physio is a bit easier to get into. And again, sometimes they might kind of say book an initial appointment with Mary Health, but that even takes a couple of months, and then you've got to wait a couple of more months for your funding. So it could be 6 months from the time that they're seeing Mary Health before they even get a plan. And then a lot of people won't put them on a wait list until they have a plan, and then their wait list, you know, could be at least 6 months long. So it could be 12 months before they're actually able to access services, or longer. So yeah, I'm trying to think of ways to make that conversation a little bit easier, thinking that you guys only have tiny amounts of time with parents when they come in and drop off.
And some children are just very quiet here, and then you hear them in a supermarket and they're chatting away, and like, where did that come from? Like,
They can be really different.
they're totally different.
Yeah.
Like, they're like Ebony when she was here. Like, we didn't hear boo, and then we found out she's a real chatterbox, and
But everyone here does, and I think we all discuss it enough.
we do.
To
Yeah.
give each other confidence, all that support as well.
Like also in the kind room, can I say name? Am I allowed to say names? or not?
First thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna tell. Yeah.
Yeah, like Ellie.
Yes.
Yeah,
She's
like
seen. She's seen. She's
Yeah,
gotten
okay.
help.
That's right. Because I was just
Yeah.
like, I still sometimes have a little bit of difficulty trying to understand what
Well,
she's saying.
Yeah, because I was
you know?
going to ask you that, Amy. Like, what would be a great response if a child's come up to you and said something and you're not sure what they've said?
Yeah, like you don't want to walk away from
Yeah.
them and they're trying to tell you something. You
And
know?
if you ask them to repeat it too many times, I feel like
Yeah.
they start to get frustrated.
So
Yeah.
sometimes I would just be like, I'm not sure what you're saying, can you show me? Some kids are going to have trouble trying to tell you in a different ways, and some kids aren't naturally going to bring something or take you to something. So if if they keep saying the same thing, you're like, I really don't know, but then you don't just want to walk off or ignore them. Maybe saying like, can you show me? Can you take me to it? Can you bring it to me? Sometimes the other kids might be good at picking up on it. But again, it might be if there's some of those kids who, particularly in this room that you're going, like their speech isn't really changing and they're quite unclear, checking in with their parents to kind of see, have they linked in with services, where things are up to.
Sometimes I find other staff are good at understanding what they're saying.
Deciphering it,
Yeah.
definitely.
It's
Teach
hard
know
though
what you're
when
saying, receive
we're
it.
all in different spaces and then it's just like, there's no one around.
I find talking to like you as a parent, because you're familiar with so many of the younger things that I'm not, and you can pick up a name of a cartoon character that I wouldn't have a clue who they are and stuff.
And sometimes it's that
Thank goodness.
context of knowing what they're talking about.
Exactly.
Again,
Yeah.
if you know that there's a particular show that they watch, then you kind of all of a sudden can understand them so much better.
Yeah.
Like she might, you go,
No, that's right. Keep it
No, I was just going to say, like, sometimes she'll come up to me and she'll be like, say something to me, and I'll try and pick up on it, but it's just like, really, really, really sorry, but I can't understand what you're saying. You know?
Yeah.
Like, but yeah, trying to pick up on interest in that, that she's like interested in that.
Yeah,
I think that's something I need to work on, trying to understand in that.
yeah.
I think in this room that's probably harder too because it gives them the sense of like, oh my god, they can't understand what I'm saying. They have a bit more knowledge of
Absolutely.
the world
And
around
I've
them, as
seen
opposed
the-
to being in the toddler
the
room,
look
where
on
toddler's
their
like,
face.
"Next."
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like puts them down a little.
It does, and you don't
Yeah.
want to do that. And I've
Yeah.
seen it happen,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and you feel bad,
Yeah,
and then you're like,
exactly.
oh.
And that's
Yeah.
probably where it's, I guess, worth having those conversations with parents, because parents are very good at understanding their own children, and usually
Yeah.
so are their extended family or maybe friends that they spend lots of time with. And so unless they're, the parents are in the situation, and a lot of the time when I talk to parents and say, oh, how do they go with other kids? They're like, I don't know, I don't hang out at daycare. Like, and their interactions outside of that are really minimal. So sometimes they're probably not aware of how maybe unclear their child's speech is. So yeah, I would encourage you to kind of chat to those parents. And we also know, thinking about school age children, when they reach school where their speech and language skills are at, they kind of stay on that trajectory for the rest of their life. So if they start school with really, really, really poor speech and language skills, yes, their language skills will continue to grow and develop, but compared to their peers who start higher, there's kind of like this really big, the gap just keeps getting bigger. And we know that we can, I guess, resolve and eliminate lots of communication difficulties like stuttering, speech sound errors, those are probably the main ones, but we can kind of, if we work on those before a child starts school and we can resolve them, that changes their trajectory a lot. Like if we say don't start working on their stuttering until they're in late primary school, it's really unlikely that we can actually get rid of it, and then they're likely to stutter for the rest of their life. And the longer they have their speech sound errors for, it's a lot harder to change those patterns. So I guess early intervention is really, really key, that we kind of don't just want to wait and see, because we know that for lots of kids they don't actually grow out of things and they need direct intervention. And we know that for lots of kids, if we wait until school age, one, it reduces their access to services because the service options get smaller as they get older, and two, like they've had those patterns for a lot longer and some things are just really, really hard to change.
If you do mention something to a parent and they say, oh, we're just waiting to see, how could you sort of approach that conversation?
Yeah, so if they say like we're waiting to see,
Yeah, like
what
they just say,
happen.
oh, we're waiting to see what happens. with that one.
Yeah. I usually encourage families, you're better off to go and see someone and have one appointment and they say, things are great, you don't need to worry, or here are some strategies, let's monitor for 6 months, then wait and see for 6 to 12 months, and then the gap gets bigger, and then it's a lot harder to resolve. So, like if you think about for kids in terms of their life, like 6 months or 12 months is a really, really long time. Like it could be like a quarter of their life, or half of their life. And so the longer we wait, that gap just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And we know that for lots of kids, waiting and seeing like doesn't really help. There's a really great handout that's on Speech Pathology Australia that's got communication milestones. It's just like a single page, actually on this one. And it's got on it like, don't wait and see, go and see your speech pathologist, that you could kind of give to parents or have out when you're talking to them about concerns. So that I guess it's not you saying we can't wait and see, but it's come from, I guess, in terms of communication, like our overarching body for Speech Pathology Australia, as speech pathologists, we're saying don't wait and see, check in earlier. Because obviously the longer we leave it, the harder it can be. But for some parents, and sometimes like there is barriers in terms of one trying to find somebody to get into. So sometimes saying like, if you're just going to wait, maybe jump on a wait list so that in 6 months' time.
Yeah, even if you said, look, you may change your mind and want to cancel by the time it comes up, but I do believe there's quite a wait list.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it worth mentioning the weight? But
well, that's what you might be able to prompt them.
not to like scare them into it, but to kind of be like, well, look, you know, if you're going to wait that long, then you're going to have this weight as well on top of that.
And I find, I guess sometimes people just don't understand how it works either. So, like, lots of people assume that they have to have a referral to see a speech pathologist, but you don't have to have a referral. Like, you can get a referral on a chronic disease management plan, and then it makes it a bit cheaper. So there's lots of, I guess, different pathways. At the moment, wait lists are really, really long. So you used to, I guess, be able to go into community health and to have an appointment and see, and they will triage you and work out, do you just need a term worth of therapy, do you actually need to be linked into an early intervention provider that specialises in children with developmental delays, or do you not really need anything. But now the wait lists are really, really long, so people are a bit limited with what they can link into. So yeah, I would definitely encourage families to get on a wait list where they can, but also I guess maybe research the place before they got onto the wait list, because everyone, like speech pathology is a very, very broad area. So some people like work with children, but it's mostly school-age children, so you could get on their wait list, and then when you get to the top of the list they go, oh, I haven't really worked with 2-year-olds before, I'm not really sure. So that would be something
another wait list.
that I would kind of encourage them. Most people have websites to kind of have a look and see what age range of children they work with, so that you're getting the right information as well. So yeah, Speech Path Australia has these little one-page posters, and then they've got a really big one that has all of them, and it's got down the side around like we're wanting to kind of keep children between the flags and knowing kind of what's normal for each age range, and why not to wait and see, and what a speech pathologist can do. So I find these ones really great to show parents, because it's a really simple one-page summary, and you can even kind of run through it, and you might be like, oh, these are all the things a 3-year-old's meant to do, but so far we're not seeing these. And because they've got like the younger ones as well, like you could pull up, if you've got kids in this room that you go, well, they're not kind of meeting the milestones for a 5-year-old, they may be a bit closer to a 3-year-old. I think maybe it's worth having a chat to someone, and they start from 12 months of age, so you can kind of use them across. So they've got them for babies as well. And I suppose when I'm working with kids, because everyone develops in slightly different ways, and so I guess what I'm always looking for is, are they making progress, and is their communication developing? If not, like that's when I would be concerned. So I might have some kids that come in, but for whatever reason, they're communication meets more like the 12-month-old, but they may be 16, they may be 18 months old. So yep, they're delayed, but we're starting to see progress. So we get some strategies in place. But I would be more concerned, say, if I saw a child who isn't clapping, isn't pointing, they don't respond to any sounds, or maybe,
the non-verbal sort of stuff, they're not actually.
They kind of haven't got those non-verbal communication skills, so we know that they're really handy prerequisites into the verbal communication skills. So you might have, say, like a 3-year-old who isn't speaking yet, but they're pointing and they're clapping, and they're maybe using gestures to communicate, compared to a child who doesn't do any of that. They're really, really different, even though they're both not speaking. I guess one child is kind of progressing in their language skills.
Still express themselves.
They can still express themselves, versus a child who kind of isn't able to communicate the needs of all.
What would you say are probably a child who's just turned 1, probably like 14, 15 months old, they're babbling quite a lot, and they're doing the non-verbal communication to us, but they're not actually saying any words. Like, what would you recommend any strategies to sort of pronounce, start pronouncing the single mum, dad, ta, all that sort of stuff? They're babbling quite a lot, rambling on for sort of a minute or so, but they don't actually say anything. What would you sort of...
And so there's, I guess, 2 main ways that children develop language. So one is the more commonly known one, when you think about a baby learns 1 word, and then they learn 2 words and 3 words, and their sentences gradually get bigger and bigger. The other one, I guess, is less commonly known, but can start with those children who do lots and lots and lots of babbling, but there's not really any clear words, but it sounds like they're trying to talk. And so some children actually learn whole chunks of language, and then they gradually step it back down over time as they get older. So it's kind of the opposite. So they will start learning phrases and maybe sentences. So if you think about maybe some older children, if you've heard of echolalia, or scripting, where they'll repeat whole phrases. So I don't know if you've ever had any autistic children here who maybe can script a whole movie, or they'll use particular phrases. So those children, if you looked back over time, the way that their language development started was probably lots and lots of babbling, and then eventually when they did speak, they would come out with a phrase, but they couldn't use those individual words by themselves. They can only use it in a sentence, and then as they get older, they eventually learn how to break the phrase down into individual words, and then they can swap the words around. So
they work backwards to work forwards, essentially.
they just, one is kind of the bottom up processing, the other is top down. And so the way that we, I guess, both of them modelling lots of language and talking is going to be helpful, and responding. So even if they're sitting there just doing lots of babbling, you could babble back, or if you think they're trying to tell you something, again, just model the words and phrases that you think they might be trying to say.
You're telling me stories, I love it.
Yep. Keyword sign can be really, really helpful. We know that that's really helpful for all children's receptive language, but some children will use it expressively, and some children do pick up on it quite quickly. And again, thinking about their interests, some children will start off where they're doing lots and lots of babbling. Like even if I compare Nancy and Edgar, Nancy did heaps of babbling, talked heaps. By the time she was Edgar's age, she kind of had like 2 words or like phrases already, and could name everybody at the daycare centre.
I remember that.
Yeah, whereas Edgar, completely different. Like you go same house, similar strategies. Nancy maybe got more one-to-one speech than I did, but very, very different. And Nancy definitely was like a Gestalt language processor, where she would learn phrases, but she couldn't use them kind of individually, and particular phrases had particular meanings. Like there was this one time she was trying to put a bikini top on, and I wasn't doing it quick enough, and so then she was like, "I'm busting," and I was like, "Well, hop off the bed and go to the toilet," but she wasn't actually busting. She was just saying, "Hurry up," because when I need to go to the toilet instead of doing something, I would say I'm busting. And so that's why we have to be really careful when we're thinking about some of those kids who don't have many words yet. And if we're saying like stop, don't hit, they can kind of attach their own meaning to that particular phrase, and they don't use it literally, they use it for the meaning that they've associated with it. So unless you know where that phrase came from, you don't actually know what they're trying to say. So but the babbling, that's they can start with doing the babbling, and you've just kind of got to model lots of phrases. And sometimes for those kids it's not actually modelling single words but modelling phrases. They pick up on language and start to copy those phrases better than single words.
So, like an example for a phrase, how would you say, "Are you telling me a story, are you?" Or
Yeah, so rule of thumb would kind of, I always recommend like avoid asking questions and instead prioritise making comments. And so again, I try and think about what they're trying to communicate, and then I add words to it. So if they're holding a lion, maybe you think they're talking about a lion. So you might say, I don't know, the lion's eating some dinner, maybe the lion's climbing up the hill. So you just add some words, and you're thinking about what stage of communication they're up to. So maybe in the baby's room, you might just be, using a single word, or you might just use a really short phrase like lion go, or lion's eating, lion's hungry. But then in the toddler's room, you might add a couple of extra words, and then it gets bigger for most kids. It's really hard for you guys to know which way they process language. But the children who are doing lots and lots of babbling and it sounds like a whole sentence, I would try modelling some phrases and see if they pick up on those better than simple words. And keyword signs as well. And sometimes the keyword signs, we usually try and pick really functional ones like toilet, more, stop, finished. But it really comes down to what that child is really interested and motivated in, and what they're going to pick up on. So sometimes it's not, stop, more and finish that they're interested in, but maybe it's animals, or maybe it's modes of transport, or maybe it's a particular song that they've learned and they really like that song, so they can do the actions.
I think all our toddlers have learned finish because they know, then I can get up and go dump my bowl. And
And it's really what's motivating to them. Like Edgar, he signs finished, and he's been able to shake his head to no forever because he doesn't ever want to eat food, so he just wants to be like, no, I'm not eating that, and that's finished. But then for Nancy, she wasn't interested in those ones, but she really liked birds, so her first sign was bird because she wanted to talk about the birds. So again, sometimes it's really random things that they're into, and it's what that individual child is interested and motivated in.
You had just mentioned autism in the sense of speech.
Yeah.
If they're learning their speech in that kind of way, is that kind of a telltale sign that they are going to at some point be diagnosed with autism, or it's not necessary? It doesn't necessarily link together.
Yeah, so it's not like a cause and effect that if they if they're Gestalt language processing, therefore they are autistic.
Right.
I guess it's very common, a common profile that is seen, but you can also be a bit of a mixture, so you can kind of learn language a little bit in both ways. It's not like a hard and fast one or the other, but definitely there's really, really young children, that I work with who can script huge amounts of information, or they just use the same things really repetitively.
Yep.
Usually, I guess, other signs that go with it is like their intonation. It sounds really quite monotone and robotic, and their kind of non-verbals aren't matching up with their verbal communication.
Yeah.
Would probably then kind of be that other communication skills that would go along with that
Yeah, so
profile.
multiple things kind of joining
Together.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, usually I guess the kids who can kind of script off an entire movie.
Oh, yeah.
They have some serious skills, or yeah, when they're really young, some of the kids that I work with, they can't really speak, but they can already read and write and spell, and you just go,
Yeah.
it's absolutely insane how they, how
Some
they
pretty phenomenal.
Yes.
Not necessarily baby age, like, but the volumes that they speak. So
Yeah.
like, if they speak so quietly like a mouse, and you might get someone to speak so loudly, so bubbly, like, is that anything to work on, or like, is that just literally how they speak?
Yeah, and I guess everyone's a little bit different, and you're going to have some kids here that are already kind of like really loud and boisterous and outgoing, and maybe talk louder, and other kids are quieter. Getting their ears checked is probably always really good, because some of those kids who maybe talk really loudly, like maybe they have got some trouble hearing, and again, those kids who are really quiet could also have. The interesting stuff with hearing is that their hearing can fluctuate. So when kids get ear infections, so sometimes when kids are sick, we don't even know that they have an ear infection. Sometimes we do, but when they have an ear infection and they've got fluid in their ears, it makes everything that they hear really muffled, and it can make it hard for them to hear speech sounds. So some kids get recurrent ear infections, so they might have like 6 ear infections, within one winter. And so then if that lasts for like a week or 2 or 3 weeks of congested ears, times that by 6, there's like 12 weeks where they're having really muffled speech, and they can't hear all of the speech sounds that, but because they pass their hearing test at birth, everyone goes, oh yeah, their hearing's fine, but it's not until they go and see an audiologist that every time they check, they go, oh, actually, you've got fluid in your ears, you need to come back. And then if they go back multiple times and there's always fluid, that's when they start looking into grommets. And for some children, that's enough, that once they get the grommets put in, then they can hear everything, so their speech and language naturally gets better. But yeah, sometimes you don't even really know, because they don't get sick enough that they need antibiotics, and yeah, there's just no way of knowing. So if they talk really loud or really quietly, that might be kind of worth checking in. But again, thinking about their personality types as well.
I was going to say, I had my hearing check not that long ago. I'm just a natural foghorn.
Yeah.
So,
Same thing.
and you've got, that's what I'm saying. Some of us are just naturally loud.
Yes, and again, thinking about their personality as well. Like, does the volume of their voice kind of fit with their personality? And does it fit with the situation? And maybe they've been like running around and they're super, heightened from being outside, and they come in really loud, or are they still really loud, like constantly across the day, and it doesn't really change?
I find children that have a sibling close in age, they yell, like it's like they have to get over the top of the sibling at home all the time.
Well, the baby's crying.
Yeah, well, maybe that too.
I was thinking of Piper and Harvey at the moment. Harvey at the moment is just so loud. Like, he'll just be,
Oh, so is Piper. Isn't that so funny?
like,
You
just
have to be
sitting
loud to
there
get over
sitting
that.
there,
Yeah.
you know,
Piper is so
crying,
loud
all of a
too.
sudden you just hear like this massive
But they
it's just
compete
so-
with each other at home too.
Yeah.
And then even, I guess, thinking about, for some of the kids that are, because Harvey's similar age to Edgar, like that copying that they do. And so if Piper's really loud, just because I know like Nancy will be standing there roaring, so then Edgar will start roaring. Their mirror neurons at the moment, they copy so much of what they see, and so you kind of go, well, maybe that's how Piper sits and reads a book at home, so that's how he reads a book.
It just reflects that,
Yeah.
Well, because I have, like, there'd be children in the nursery or children when I would see classrooms, and they'd either talk so quietly, like I'd be like, sorry, what was that? Like, I couldn't hear you. Like, and I get close to them, and I don't know if that makes them fear of what they need to say because I'm so close to them, or if it's just simply they're just quiet, they're just naturally quiet.
Yeah, really tricky to know. But yeah, I always would think about like their personality. Do they have siblings? Does it kind of fit with that? Is it that maybe you're a different person to them, so then they're going to be a little bit more reserved and quiet compared to someone who's usually in their room that they're super loud for?
And if mums and dads are very quiet too.
Would you, like with Eddie, he doesn't always respond to his name, but Sometimes. Would you recommend like staying at the same tone though? Like if I was like, Eddie, because sometimes I feel like I'll start yelling and I'm like, I need to stop this. Because sometimes you don't know if they're just ignoring you or if it is like a little bit of a... Because he doesn't always respond.
And so you're a natural follower.
I know, I'm really loud. So I feel like I'm already loud.
Look, I wouldn't say he's quiet. He just isn't loud with his words, that's all.
Yeah.
He's loud in other ways.
I guess we need to think about as well, some kids are really, really good at, they just block everything out while they're engaged in something, and some kids need multiple, I guess, modes when you're trying to get their attention. So just listening, like maybe their auditory processing isn't as great as their visual, so maybe you actually have to stand in front, get down to their level, and then say their name.
Right.
Or
yeah.
some children actually leave like a touch prompt, so you might have to touch their shoulder and say their name, because if you just say their name, that isn't enough.
Yeah.
But if
That's a
you're
good
like
point.
standing there super close, touching their arm,
Yeah.
you're still screaming at the top of your lungs and they still aren't responding, I will be kind of going like, is their hearing definitely okay, knowing that their hearing can change? Or are they so deeply ingrained in something that it's just really, really hard to get them out of that, and no matter what you do with a touch and being in their visual field and also like saying something, if that's not enough to get their attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think definitely touching Eddie's shoulder.
It does. It's more when he's over there that I'm like...
concerning thing
Oh,
if
yes,
they're
so
constantly in that
stay
stage,
in
like
the
say they're just
street,
all
yeah.
day, they're just in
Yeah.
that focus
Yeah.
type
He was
thing.
definitely
Is
ignoring
that
me
something
there.
to be worried about, or?
Would they be like doing the same thing, or they move?
No, they
between
move into
things?
different things, but just like constantly
Super
super
focused, and you
fixated.
can't get their attention.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so yeah, no matter what you do, it's really hard to get
yeah,
attention. Yep. And they don't respond to their name.
not really, no.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think it would be worth looking into if you just kind of went all day. It's really, really hard to get their attention. They don't respond to their name. They're always really focused on something. And
Yeah.
it's hard to get their attention. And I suppose thinking about like you guys spend lots of time with lots of children, you can pretty quickly this child's development looks really different to the rest of their peers, or is really delayed to the rest of their peers. Like if it's different or delayed, then I would kind of say, yeah, definitely encourage their parents to get check in with someone, because the worst someone is going to say is no, like the audiologist is going to say their hearing's fine, I'm going to say their talking's fine. Like worst case scenario for the parents, they went and had an appointment and they didn't need to follow anything up. But if they do get in and see someone and then we're able to kind of give them strategies and make corrections, it can make a really big difference.
What about if they were older and it was just a sort of like pronunciation issue?
Yeah.
Like, how would you approach that? Because I don't think...
With the parent? Or
Yeah.
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 Like,
yeah.
would it be sort of like, oh, so they're going to be ready for school soon, so maybe have you know...
Yeah, so if you, and so when we think about speech, we develop speech sounds at different ages. So there's some sounds that we don't expect children to have until they're like, 8 years old. So the kids that are here aren't going to have that sound. But there's definitely sounds that we, they should usually have a majority of their sounds before they start school, and they're usually pretty clear. And then the other thing that we look at is the type of errors that they're making, because there's particular errors that we would consider like typical that might naturally resolve on their own, but then there's some that are atypical that are less likely, they're probably not going to naturally resolve.
She says like F for a C most of the time.
Yeah.
So like... And that's the main one that I've noticed, but I know there's a few others.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like, that's what I mean, like I can usually tell what she's saying,
Yeah.
but it is very like,
Tricky to understand.
yeah,
Yeah.
like
yeah.
she'll say things and,
Yeah. And so
oh, that sounds a bit wrong because you were meaning this, but
yeah. And
yeah.
so some kids do have speech sound disorders and speech sound errors, and sometimes even for language we don't know why they have difficulty pronouncing things and learning language, but they need help. But it's definitely worth, like if you've got kids, that are starting school, so in January you've got kids that have really unclear speech and they're starting school the following year, like I would definitely be saying go and see a speechy. I find it so tricky when I get referrals in December and they're like, we're starting school in February, and it's like, we are not going to get any of this resolved. Or even for some families it might have been like, this time of year where someone said, so by the time they make the phone call and book the appointment, like we're looking towards the end of term 4, Like, there's no way we're getting on top of those speech sound errors if they've got a lot of them by the time they start school. And like we talked about, then they're starting school behind, and they're forever trying to catch up. So even if it's just, their pronunciation, and there's lots of sounds that they have trouble saying, or there's particular things like lisps, definitely worth thinking of
Okay.
someone.
Because sometimes you think, oh, well, you know,
That is-
it's different. I think from what I've experienced with Eddie, and then that, I mean, she's still talking, can still most of the time understand her.
Yeah.
Is it that big a deal that I should mention it?
Yeah.
But it, like when you put it like that, it,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and the other thing we want to think about is if they're having trouble pronouncing lots of sounds, even though you guys as adults might be able to understand them, or you can use the context, is it affecting their interactions with peers? Are they getting frustrated? Are they aware that, you know, like you said, sometimes kids will say something to you and you don't understand them, and you can tell the look on their face? Like, that's when, as speech pathologists, we kind of get quite concerned because the child has an awareness of their communication difficulties. And then if we're thinking about long-term mental health things and occupations, there's so many other things that it impacts. So for right now, you're like, oh, they can talk and they're not that tricky to understand, but what's the long-term implication if we do nothing about it? And that, you know, the interaction with their peers, if their peers can't understand them, then they're probably just going to walk off, and then does that stop them from having friends or maintaining friends? So definitely worth checking in with their parents, because the worst thing that can happen, they have one appointment, they don't need speech therapy, and we send them on their way. But I would say majority of the families that I see, I've probably only seen one person in the last 12 months that I was a bit like, you're pretty good, you don't need to come back unless you have other concerns. Most of the time when families come, I feel like if the parents are concerned or someone else has raised concerns, there's usually some strategies that we need to put in place.
Any more questions, anyone?
I'm trying to think.
So I can just go onto the Speech Pathology Australia.
Yeah, I can send you the link. So I made like a whole page of different handouts. So there's one with all of those handouts. Then I've put a link for the different ages that children are meant to have particular speech sounds. It's on a nice visual, so you guys might look at it and go, oh, for the 5-year-olds in this class, they're meant to have all of these sounds. So if they can't say most of those sounds, then you might be more concerned. I'm just trying to think of what other handouts. Oh, I had this really good one. It's called a speech sound guide, and it's for each of the sounds in English, or the consonant sounds, and it's got like a list of words that naturally have that sound in it that come up lots when children talk, and a list of activities, daily routines, songs and book where that sound occurs. So say, for example, I don't know, you might have lots of kids in this room who have trouble producing their S sound. So you might go, well, when we're sitting down playing cards, I'm going to use lots of words that have the S sound in it to kind of bombard their hearing, and where maybe the book that we pick and the song that we sing in group time is going to focus on this particular sound. So that's a handout that I give to lots of parents that's got lots of nice strategies and ideas in it. But yeah, I had like a whole page of links that I can send you with different resources and information in it. So,
And I suppose then it's up to us, because a lot of the girls did the key words but we haven't been consistent with it. I know I haven't at all.
But we've got those new ones hanging up in our room, and I did send one over with Jenna.
I was going to say, I think there's certain words over there that we are consistent with and we do all the time, which is like
Just the
finished
general.
eat,
And
like
even
all of that
you
kind
can
of
read
stuff.
times too, like in the morning.
And I
sort of
think-
decides, whether it is finished, or you know, wash your hands.
You're like, quite often we do like play and washing hands when I'm asking them what they'd like to do over there.
I think it was maybe teacher that I spoke to ages ago that we talked about, because you guys have like different themes each month, and I don't know if the themes are across the whole centre or each room has different themes, but linking your keyword signs to that theme. So if you're doing emotions for the month, like maybe your target is just to use a couple of different emotion signs, or then if the next month you're doing colours, like practice signing the colours, because sometimes I feel like it's really hard when you do a keyword sign course and you learn like over 100 signs, then you come back and you're like, how do I actually implement it?
And then we talked about doing it as like part of the program involving parents, where you display it on the wall and go, okay, this is the sign we're doing for this month.
Yeah.
Like, this is what we're practicing, this is what we're going to do next month. And then you have it on a big wall all together.
Yes, yeah. So at the start of the year, you have like, this is the sign we learned